JBN, we keep you informed. 9 killed by Briana after stowing away to Jamaica. Okay, guys, I came across this story from the New York Times, written by Azam Hamid, and it's very interesting. People are always asking, how do so many guns come to Jamaica? Follow this story to the end. It is very intriguing. It all began 4 years ago when she came to Jamaica from the United States, sneaking in illegally after stowing away to avoid detection. Within a few short years, she became one of the nation's most wanted assassins. Clarendon was her parish of choice. She carried out 9 confirmed kills, the killing of her father at a wake, a double homicide outside a bar, and the murder of a single mother of 3. Her violence was indiscriminate. She shot and nearly killed a 14-year-old girl getting ready for church. The police named her Briana because they had no clues as to who she was. They only knew her country of origin, the United States, where she'd been virtually untraceable since 1991. She was a phantom, the 8th most wanted killer on an island with no shortage of murder, suffering one of the highest homicide rates in the world, and she was only one of thousands. Briana's serial number 245 PN 70462 was a 9mm Browning handgun. Purchased in 1991 by a farmer in Greenville, North Carolina, the Browning vanished from the public record for nearly 24 years until it suddenly started wreaking havoc in Jamaica. For 3 years, its ballistic fingerprint connected it to shootings, mystifying law enforcement. Finally, after a firefight with the police, it was recovered last year and its bloody run came to an end. The authorities traced the serial number back to the handgun's original owner, but that did not explain how the weapon wound up in Jamaica decades later, or how the authorities could prevent the next Briana from arriving. The mystery is no accident. By law, licensed gun merchants in the United States are not required to do much more than record retail sales, and usually don't have to record them to the authorities. After that, if a gun is lost, stolen, or handed to someone else, paperwork is only sometimes required. I still love him and miss him all the time, said Clovis Cook Sr., weeping over the murder of his son Clovis Jr., who was gunned down in 2017 with the Browning the authorities called Briana. He took care of me, Mr. Cook said of his son. Every week he would then come by and bring food and groceries and pay the bills. Jamaica brims with losses like these. American weapons are routinely funneled into the country aboard ships, flooding cities like Kingston, the capital, where high-grade assault rifles are wielded by warring gangs. Jamaica's own gun laws are relatively strict, with fewer than 45,000 legal firearms in a country of almost 3 million. But it is awash in illegal weapons. The Jamaican authorities, who estimate that 200 guns are smuggled into the country from the United States every month, routinely ask American officials to examine some of the weapons they seize in raids during traffic stops or at the ports. But here in Jamaica, the killings are rarely driven by such enormous profits. The drug trade has fallen from its heyday, organized crime has been fractured, and most of the historic kingpins have been killed or imprisoned. Inside, the guns in Jamaica are often used in petty feuds, neighborhood beefs, and turf wars that go back to decades, to when political parties authored the majority of the country's violence. Because guns are so plentiful, small insults and old vendettas that might otherwise leave few casualties grow much more dangerous, not just for the combatants, but also for anyone who happens to be in the way. Johnny Ray Dunn walked into a North Carolina gun store in the fall of 1991 and purchased an American Icon, a 9mm Browning. With its all-steel frame, the gun was built to weather abuse, with a reputation for accuracy and functionality. Mr. Dunn, a farmer, handed over his details and went home with a gun that, if maintained, would last a lifetime. That's where Briana's paper trail began and ended. The law effectively ruled out a federal system of tracking all firearms, so when Mr. Dunn's gun suddenly showed up in Jamaica, linked to a series of homicides from 2015 through early 2018, no one could figure out how it got there. The ATF was unable to trace the gun beyond its initial purchase, and Mr. Dunn would not have been required to report if it had been sold, swapped, lost, or stolen. The weapon disappeared into what some experts call the black hole of American gun laws. Mr. Dunn died in 2011, according to a local newspaper, and is not considered a suspect in the gun's path to Jamaica. All that is known is that, more than 20 years after being sold in North Carolina, the handgun became one of the most lethal in Jamaica, the tool of a one-eyed gangster named Hawkeye. Samuda Daly got the nickname as a boy. He saw poorly out of one eye, and after an unsuccessful surgery left it covered in a makeup film, his alias was born. Mr. Daly was a product of violence, shaped by its near constant presence in his life. As a child, a relative said his mother was stabbed to death by his uncle. By ninth grade, he had dropped out of school to start working at a sugar factory, telling his family he didn't want to rely on anyone. He joined the Gaza Gang, a clique of young men who had grown up together in a knotted cluster of streets in Clarendon. They began by hanging out, not fighting, his family said. But in the crucible of poverty and desperation, where small conflicts can turn deadly, they ran afoul of a similar group, the King Street Gang. The rivalry grew quickly. On September 19, 2015, almost exactly 24 years after Mr. Dunn purchased the gun, the first sign that it had made its way to Jamaica appeared. A man named Okivi Martin was killed with an unknown 9mm Browning. There was no money or territory at stake, residents say. The motive seemed to be revenge. The girlfriend of the Gaza Gang's leader had been shot by mistake in an earlier episode. She survived, but the rumor mill led it to Mr. Martin, and retribution came swiftly. The gun laid dormant for a year before claiming the life of a 17-year-old Shane Sewell on September 6, 2016. He was walking home, having left a bar after a night with friends. He ended up in a ditch, riddled with bullets, some from the mysterious Browning. Officials believe he was killed in a dispute over a different firearm. In Jamaica, guns are often rented out by their owners, as a hardware store might rent out valuable tools. The borrower, looking to commit a robbery or even kill someone, pays a fee to use the weapon. Afterward, the gun is returned. Given a gun's income potential when one is lost or stolen, the consequences can be deadly. In the summer of 2017, the Browning struck again. Kurt Mitchell, a fisherman believed to be a member of the King Street Gang, was gunned down at a party, a reprisal for an earlier homicide against the Gaza Gang, the authorities believe. His death, in turn, generated still more deaths, in the tragic rhythm that violence often takes in Jamaica. Much of the fighting today stems from political conflicts that stretch back long before the shooters were born. In past decades, armed groups loyal to one of the two major parties, the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party, battled one another for dominance. The 9mm Browning became a terrifying facet of this landscape, with evidence standing to more than 8 homicide scenes. As officials tried to stitch together the clues, the gun was repeatedly being used as an enforcement tool of the Gaza Gang, often by Mr. Daly, the killer known as Hawkeye. He was quiet, never bragging about his exploits. Residents and family members said he didn't need to. His ruthlessness was well known, and neighbors offered him a grudging respect. Mr. Daly had become embroiled in a personal feud with another gangster, Christopher Lynch, and some of the shootings that plagued Clarendon in 2017 came from their hatred for each other, officials say. They had once been close friends, almost like family, relatives said, but that former intimacy now burned with an equally intense hostility. Mr. Daly tried to kill him on a Sunday in 2017 when he spotted him walking home from a soccer game. He fired at Mr. Lynch, who took off running through the woods and escaped, officials say. But a stray bullet struck a 14-year-old girl in the stomach as she prepared for church. Luckily, the girl survived. Months later, Mr. Lynch's father was at a wake, a late-night affair with drinks and music, a celebration of life common in parts of Jamaica. At around 10:30 p.m., investigators now believe Mr. Daly stormed the wake and began shooting. The elder Lynch died. 3 others were injured. Once again, the bullet fragments connected the shootings to the 9mm. Not all guns vanish without a trace and suddenly reappear decades later. Some are bought openly and sent overseas right away. From late 2016 through early 2017, a 74-year-old man from Idaho purchased three military-styled rifles and a Glock .45 pistol in Meridian, Idaho, a town of about 100,000 people surrounded by more than 2 dozen gun stores. 6 months later, all four guns were recovered by the Jamaican authorities in a raid in the Montego Bay area where criminal violence has overwhelmed the parish of St. James. The weapons, like other illicit arms in Jamaica, arrive in containers aboard the hundreds of ships that come to the island each month. Often they slip through in small batches, broken down into parts, and hidden in freezers or car engines to evade inspectors. Of course, not all illegal guns in Latin America and the Caribbean come from the United States. In some countries, including those with weapons left over from civil wars, fewer than half of the illicit weapons trace back to American soil. It was a Glock .45 that caught the attention of American and Jamaican authorities. Only 3 months after the Idaho man purchased it, the gun was already in Jamaica and had killed Jeffrey Cato, a 39-year-old mentally ill man, on March 17, 2017. Mr. Cato, a beloved figure in the community flankers, had no obvious enemies. He seemed to float in his own space, neighbors said, harmless and uninvolved. On the day of his death, Mr. Cato was getting food for one of his children. The police never identified a motive, but believe he may have witnessed a murder. He had no gang connections whatsoever, said one detective, speaking anonymously, because the investigation was still open. In my 8 years working, there's only a few cases that still stick with me. This is one of them. Last July, the gun was used again to kill Nicholas Kerr, a quiet 41-year-old who lived downstairs in his mother's house. He was shot at a corner store buying a soda. We have always had enemies here, said Mr. Kerr's mother, withholding her name for fear of retribution. But Nicholas, she added, he was peaceful. Giovanni Hall was DJing at a local bar near Clarendon at 11:30 p.m. on October 6, 2017, when gunmen burst in without warning. After robbing the bar and its patrons, they opened fire, hitting Mr. Hall, who died on the way to the hospital. Officials recognized the culprit, a weapon they had come to loathe, the Browning. The murder was the beginning of a spree. 2 days later, another shooting occurred at Three Sisters Bar about 10:50 p.m. Two friends, Clovis Cook and Otis Gordon, were standing outside drinking when a car pulled up. The shooter fired 21 shots and sped off. Investigators found yet another set of 9mm fragments. Every murder committed, every life taken, left a wound that never healed. 10 minutes from the Three Sisters Bar, which is now dormant and overgrown with dense foliage, Mr. Cook's parents live in their simple, ply-boarded home off the side of the highway. His father, recovering from cataract surgery, plodded around in the dark, searching for overdue bills in the drift of papers on the small dining table. He wept at the mention of his son, 33, who used to pay the bills and help out around the house. Married at 15, his parents grew up raising him, but time had inverted their roles, and now with him out, they were nearly destitute. I think about him every day, he said. Every day them kill people, he said, and every day me grieve about it. The same void haunted the home where Jody and Harvey was killed less than 2 months after Mr. Cook in what some believe was a case of mistaken identity. Gunmen charged into a one-room shack, kicking open the door and firing on Miss Harvey and her daughter as they slept in the small bed they shared. Miss Harvey covered the girl with her body, taking 6 9mm rounds in the hail of gunfire. Her daughter survived. Last spring, the home still sat abandoned in a thicket of trees, its wooden stairwell rotting, its blue and green paint blistered. Ashley Wilson, Miss Harvey's sister, had come by to visit, to fill the single room with memories, to mourn. Me just miss her, I guess, she said, swinging the rickety door open. I go inside into her room where it happened. It brings back a lot of memories. I look at pictures of her, listen to music we like, talk to her daughter. This is how it goes. The deadly run of the Browning ended in some ways. This is the way it began. Joy Comack, the girlfriend of the Gaza gang's leader, The person who had been shot by mistake and survived, starting the cycle of revenge that first set the handgun loose on Jamaica, was killed on January 21, 2018. The casings match the earlier crimes. The gun killed Miss Comock as well, officials say. She was home alone with her daughter when she heard a noise, the police say. It was just after midnight, and the smell of smoke filled the air. She ran outside and found a burning fire in her front yard. She knelt to extinguish the flames and was shot multiple times by an assailant hiding in the shadows. Her daughter, one of three, hid inside. When the girl emerged, her mother was dead, lying face down in the yard. She was the sole breadwinner, said Miss Comics' sister, Latoya Evans. They were her life. They expect you to forget about it. But when you lose somebody, you don't just get up and act normal, she added, holding her daughter tight. By early 2018, the authorities were still no closer to finding the gun. They knew its caliber, and even the conflict the gun was caught in. But while Mr. Daly, the enforcer known as Hawkeye, was still alive, no witnesses dared to testify. At about 11 p.m. on April 28, an off-duty policeman was having a drink at a local bar in Clarendon when two men showed up to rob it. One of them was Mr. Daly, who flashed the Browning at patrons and demanded money. The officer drew on the two men and announced himself, officials say. Mr. Daly turned and fired, but the policeman had the drop on both men, killing Mr. Daly on the spot. And like that, the gun was off the streets. Witnesses came forward to link Mr. Daly to all the shootings, officials say, and the police later asked the ATF to run a trace on his weapon. It led all the way to North Carolina to a time before Mr. Daly was ever born. JBN, we keep you informed. Please remember to subscribe, like, share, leave us a comment, and click the notification bell to receive our daily news items.